Hey guys, thanks for watching our video on the 10 principles of nervous system function. We're going to start off with principle 1, which is the nervous system produces movement within a perceptual world that the brain creates. Have you ever thought about how you see the world and how it might be different from someone else? Do you believe that we see color or even shapes in the same way? Our reality is our own and is only what we perceive. The brain creates our own personal realities. The brain receives sensory information from external sources and then integrates it to produce our realities. The brain sends information to our muscles to react to this reality also.
So now we'll go on to principle 3, which is many of the brain circuits are crossed. Ever wondered what makes us right-handed or left-handed? Turns out there are studies that show a correlation between handiness and left-right hemispherical strength. Though these studies show much stronger correlation with those that are right-handed, the idea that the left hemisphere dominates in language control as those that are right-handed is supported by a larger and more developed left hemisphere than left-handed counterparts who show the same difference in their right hemispheres. This is just one of the many examples that exemplifies the idea that our motor controls in olfactory somatic nervous systems are ipsilateral or countercrossed, meaning our left hemisphere controls our right side and the right hemisphere controls the left. This, of course, is all connected by the corpus callosum, a connection between the two hemispheres made of about 200 million nerve fibers.
I'm going to be talking about principle 4, which is that the nervous system functions on multiple levels. What this means is that sensory and motor function are carried out in many different places within the brain. And this ability stems from the way that brains have evolved in order to carry out complex functions. This principle establishes that each new addition adds levels of behavioral complexity without discarding the previous levels of control. Humans have most recently developed the forebrain, which helps aid in decision making. We also have structures like the spinal cord and the brainstem. Other animals don't have the same complexity that humans have. And as a real-world example, spiders, such as the one pictured here, are capable of performing many activities that we cannot. For example, they can see ultraviolet rays, create complex webs to capture prey in, and walk on 8 legs. These complex behaviors require, if not different brain structures, then at least a different configuration of parts of the brain compared to humans. So in order to perform these functions, researchers have discovered that many spider brains extend through their legs and abdomen.
Next we're going to be talking about principle 5, which is that the brain is both symmetrical and asymmetrical. Our brain is pretty simple looking geometrically. We have a left and right hemisphere, and they're obviously very symmetrical to each other, and generally look the same. But inside the brain, this is not completely true. Our brains are actually fairly asymmetrical. Not only does our left hemisphere control our motor movement on our right side and vice versa, but functions of different parts of each hemisphere are very different. The left hemisphere, for example, is more in control of an analytical thought, logic, and language, while the right hemisphere is more in control of creativity and holistic thought.
Now we're going to talk about principle 6, which is the brain is organized both in hierarchical and parallel. The brain is organized into 6 layers of different cell types and densities, and these layers neurons communicate both within the layer, which is parallel, and between the layers, which is hierarchical. Behaviors and cognition happen because this diverse communication system. The brain functions as a result of many neurons with different specialties working together to form many pathways. It would be like a student talking to another student to get advice, and then both of those students moving up a level to talk to the professor. It's just a whole bunch of layers talking to each other in a lot of different ways.
Now we're going to talk about principle 8, which is sensory input to the brain is divided for object recognition and motor control. In simple organisms, sensory detection was something that evolved after motor control, sort of like a warning or hint towards where they need to move. Light detection, or for example, light detection or eating, or an example would be object recognition. In more complex organisms, we have separate systems both detecting sensory information and then carrying out the motor movement in response. A good example of this is the visual information stream, which involves the temporal lobe and parietal lobe. Visual input travels from the eye to the thalamus to the occipital lobe, Once visual information reaches the occipital cortex, it can go one of two ways. One is highlighted by the ventral stream, where info goes to the temporal lobe in order to be identified. The other stream is called the dorsal stream, and info will travel to the parietal lobe in order to make movements in relation to the objects that have just been identified. Our brain is basically the epitome of team spirit and cooperation.
Okay, now I'm going to be talking about principle 9, which is that functions in the brain are both localized and distributed. This means that the aspects that help carry out the function of something like language are housed in different parts of the brain. Language includes things like the comprehension of spoken words, written words, signed words like for sign language, touched words for braille, and it even includes producing words and holistic lingual compositions. It's silly to think that just one structure of the brain could be responsible for all of those activities, because if that were the case, then even one small lesion to the structure could be devastating and result in complete loss of function. But because the functions are both localized to many specific structures and distributed throughout the brain, a light injury could impair some part of language functioning, but it would take a sizable injury to remove all language functions.
Now for principle 10, which is that the nervous system works by juxtaposing excitation and inhibition. The nervous system is all based on the ability of neurons to either be inhibited or excited. Inhibition is considered when an axon is not excited on a certain pathway, whereas excitation continues the process of the axon firing. Both of these actions are caused by certain neurochemicals that start or stop the neurotransmitters in the process. This causes the ability for someone to react in an appropriate way to some stimulus, while other people whose neurons do not excite or inhibit appropriately would not act appropriately in that situation. However, this is not limited to working correctly or incorrectly because every person's neurons excite and inhibit differently. For example, someone with a phobia of snakes would excite their limbic system, the system that controls emotions, if they saw a snake, but someone who is not afraid would not excite those specific neurons in that pattern.